Graduated college with a borrowed cap, a borrowed gown, and a future that disappeared faster than the applause. While everyone else hugged their families and talked about jobs and cities, I stood alone at the edge of the crowd pretending to check my phone. There were no messages, no congratulations, no place to go. My student housing contract ended that same week, and the part-time job I depended on vanished with budget cuts. By the time the campus emptied, I was carrying my life in a single backpack, telling myself it was temporary, telling myself I was still one of the lucky ones. Temporary stretched into weeks. I slept on couches until the invitations quietly stopped. I learned how to kill time without spending money, how to eat one cheap meal a day and convince myself it was enough. Every rejection email felt heavier than the last. The degree I worked years for became a piece of paper folded in my bag, useless against rent prices and silence. Pride kept me from calling people who barely remembered me anyway. Shame kept me from staying in town. When winter started creeping into the evenings, I made a choice that didn't feel brave, just necessary. I left. The mountains had always been there, unmoved by human success or failure. I hitchhiked until roads narrowed and trees grew thick enough to swallow sound. I walked uphill with no plan beyond distance. The higher I went, the quieter the world became. And for the first time in months, my thoughts slowed. Fear was still there, but it was honest fear now. Cold, hunger, darkness, things you could prepare for, even if badly. The first nights were the worst. I slept under a tarp tied between trees, waking every hour to adjust against the wind. My hands shook constantly, not just from cold but from the weight of what I'd lost. Food ran low fast. I learned which berries to avoid, how to stretch oatmeal, how to melt snow without wasting fuel. Each morning felt like a small victory I didn't celebrate. Survival didn't feel heroic. It felt quiet and stubborn. One afternoon, while searching for firewood, I noticed metal catching the light through the trees. At first I thought it was trash. Another reminder that people pass through everything and leave pieces behind. But when I pushed aside branches, I saw the curved skeleton of a Quonset hut half collapsed against the slope. Rust ate at the ribs, and snow had caved part of it in. But the shape was unmistakable. It was old, forgotten, still standing. I sat there for a long time, running my hand over the cold metal. Someone had built this once with intention. Someone believed it would matter. I didn't know why it had been abandoned, but I knew what it was meant for. Shelter. Against weather. Against time. Against being erased. In that moment, it felt like the mountain had answered me, not with comfort, but with a challenge. I moved into the area that same day. Not inside the Quonset yet, it wasn't safe, but close enough that it became the center of my world. I scavenged everything I could find. Scraps of sheet metal, rotting boards, old wire. Stones heavy enough to hold things down. My hands learned pain in new ways. Cuts became normal. Bruises layered over each other. Every improvement was tiny. Every mistake cost energy I barely had. At night I lay awake, listening to wind hit the curved metal frame. A hollow sound like breathing. I talked to myself more than I should have, narrating plans just to hear a human voice. Doubt came hardest after dark. Who was I pretending to be? An engineer? A builder? A survivor? I was just a broke graduate hiding from failure. But each morning the frame was still there. So was I. The mountain didn't care about my story. Storms came without warning. One night, snow fell so heavy I had to crawl out of my tarp shelter just to keep it from collapsing. My fingers went numb. Panic rose fast, sharp and irrational. I remember pressing my forehead to the ground, breathing until the shaking slowed, telling myself to focus on the next 10 minutes, not my life. I started working on the Quonset seriously after that. If I was going to stay, I needed walls. I cleared snow, reinforced the base with stones, propped sagging ribs with timber cut by hand. Progress was slow but visible. The curved shape began to close in on itself, blocking wind in ways my tarp never could. Inside, the air felt different, still almost warm. Hunger sharpened my senses. I noticed small details I'd ignored before. how sunlight moved across the slope where snow melted first, which direction storms usually came from. I learned the mountain's habits because my comfort depended on them. I stopped thinking about resumes and deadlines. My world shrank to essentials: fire, water, shelter, tomorrow. Somewhere in that process, something inside me shifted. I wasn't running anymore. I was building. The Quonset wasn't a symbol yet. It was just a structure that might keep me alive through the coming weeks. But every bolt tightened, every gap closed, felt like pushing back against the version of myself that believed I was done. I didn't know how long I could last up there. I didn't know if this would end in rescue, return, or disaster. All I knew was that the mountain had given me a chance in the form of rusted steel. And I was answering it the only way I could, one cold, deliberate action at a time. The first morning after deciding to commit fully to the Quonset project, I woke to the sharp sting of frost on my cheeks. My body had adjusted slightly to the cold, but it didn't matter. Every movement hurt like an unrelenting reminder that comfort no longer existed. I packed the few supplies I had salvaged: rusted nails, old rope, splintered wood, and climbed the slope toward the frame. The sun barely cleared the ridge, painting long shadows over the metal skeleton. I realized then that this mountain wasn't just a backdrop for survival. It was a teacher, indifferent but precise, demanding respect from anyone who dared live on its slopes. I spent hours lifting scrap metal, positioning warped panels against the frame. Each piece refused to sit perfectly, twisting and bending under its own age. I hammered, pried, tied, and shoved, learning by the slow, brutal feedback of failure. My fingers bled, and when I finally paused, the palms were raw, my joints stiff, and a small, triumphant space had begun to form inside the Quonset, a hollow I could call shelter. It wasn't livable yet, but it was promising. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of control over my life. Days blended into nights. The mountain's routine became my own. I woke at dawn, scavenged, repaired, and prepared for the worst that could come. Food was scarce. But I learned to stretch small victories: half an energy bar for breakfast, a handful of dried berries for lunch, and melting snow for water when streams froze. Hunger sharpened everything. It taught me patience, strategy, and a deep awareness of what mattered. The Quonset was more than metal. It became a symbol of the possibility of stability in a life that had none. Winter tested me relentlessly. Storms arrived without warning, gusting winds collapsing the temporary supports I had painstakingly placed. Snow piled high against the curved walls, threatening to bend the structure into uselessness. I learned to anchor each section with stones and timber, to wedge planks against the ribs, to craft small reinforcements out of broken branches. The mountain did not forgive laziness or hesitation. Every night, as I crawled into a shallow depression in the snow beside my work, exhaustion wrapped me like a blanket, but I felt alive in a way I hadn't for months. Loneliness settled in as the only constant companion. I spoke to myself frequently, narrating plans, counting bolts, measuring spaces, even composing little stories in my mind to stave off despair. At first it felt silly, embarrassing even, but slowly, these conversations became a lifeline. I learned to observe silence, to hear the subtle changes in wind patterns, the quiet movement of animals, the distant crack of ice shifting in hidden creeks. The mountain was not empty. It was full of life I had ignored in my previous busy existence. By the third week, the Quonset was beginning to resemble a true shelter. Gaps were closed with mud and resin I scavenged, the curved metal forming a shell that cut wind significantly. I constructed a small wood-burning stove from salvaged metal and stones. For the first time, I could cook food without worrying about immediate freezing. The smoke trailed upward, invisible to anyone below, but it gave me a sense of accomplishment. That little plume was proof that I had created something sustainable from nothing. Each meal was a reminder that I could still provide for myself. As days passed, I adapted to the mountain's tempo. I mapped safe paths to hidden water sources, learned where sunlight lingered longest to keep my shelter warm, and which slopes were dangerous after fresh snowfall. My hands became tools, my body a measuring device, my mind a strategic planner. Every storm, every night shivering alone, strengthened a resolve I didn't know I had. I realized that survival wasn't just about avoiding death, it was about shaping life, even in its smallest forms, from circumstances that seemed hopeless. Sleep became a fragile luxury. I layered clothing, piled blankets of branches, and adjusted the Quonset's interior constantly to hold warmth. Nights were still terrifying. Wolves howled in the distance, branches snapped under heavy snow, and shadows played tricks on my mind. Yet I learned to focus on breathing, to measure fear as one might measure a resource, and to trust that preparation could counter panic. The Quonset was not a fortress, but it was a sanctuary of my making, and that was enough to sustain me. Weeks turned into a month. My diet remained meager, but the work I invested transformed the Quonset into a functional shelter. The curved metal deflected wind, small gaps were sealed, and the stove provided both warmth and the possibility of cooking. I began to organize the interior, carving sections for sleeping, cooking, and storing salvaged supplies. The mountain had become a structured world, no longer chaotic, and in this order I found hope. I was learning patience, endurance, and the profound satisfaction of tangible accomplishment. The Quonset taught me more than survival. It taught ingenuity. I created rudimentary shelves from planks, hung ropes to dry food and clothes, and devised methods to catch snow for water efficiently. Every improvement increased my confidence. I started to see the potential in scarcity, the creativity in limitations. What I had first seen as a half-broken frame became a canvas. My hands shaped the space. My mind envisioned the outcome. Each day reinforced that I could not rely on the world, only on what I could build with my own effort. Despite progress, loneliness remained a relentless presence. I longed for conversation, human warmth, and even the smallest social interaction. Yet the mountain's isolation forced me to confront my inner thoughts, my regrets and my ambitions stripped of pretense. I became intimately familiar with myself, flaws, fears, and all. The Quonset, in its growing solidity, reflected the internal architecture I was constructing: resilience, patience, and the stubborn insistence to endure. I began to feel a strange pride, not the kind that demands applause, but the kind that hums quietly when survival is a testament to effort alone. Spring began to thaw the mountain. Snow retreated, revealing hidden streams and dry wood caches. With improved access to water and fuel, I could cook more efficiently and clean the shelter, making it livable rather than merely survivable. The Quonset, once a skeleton of rusted steel, now offered warmth, organization, and even a sense of permanence. Each day I modified and strengthened, reinforcing weak spots and expanding storage. The structure that began as a chance discovery now became the center of a life, built meticulously from hardship. By the end of the season, I realized that survival had evolved into living. I had created a space that protected me, taught me, and allowed me to thrive in the smallest measures. The mountain's harsh lessons became my own wisdom. I was no longer the helpless graduate who wandered aimlessly. I was a builder, a planner, and above all, a survivor. The Quonset, once merely a frame, now stood as a testament to human persistence. My hands, scarred and calloused, had transformed a discarded metal skeleton into a home. In the solitude of the mountains, I discovered the quiet, unwavering strength that sustains life against all odds. By the time the mountain fully shed its winter coat, the Quonset had become more than shelter, it had become life itself. The metal walls, once jagged and rusted, now formed a solid, insulated shell that held warmth and promise. I had carved out a routine that was precise and unyielding. Rise at dawn, check water and firewood, repair anything weak, and plan for the day ahead. This structure, this curved fortress of metal and human effort, had taught me lessons that no classroom ever could: endurance, resourcefulness, and the quiet strength that comes from building something with nothing. The days were still long but no longer meaningless. I explored the slopes cautiously, identifying edible plants, mapping safe paths, and marking weak sections of snow or unstable soil. I fashioned tools from rocks and scrap metal, hammers, shovels, hooks, and learned to improvise when something broke. Each challenge was a puzzle demanding both patience and ingenuity. My hands, once soft and sheltered, were now tough, scarred, and precise. My mind, previously cluttered with doubt, had become a careful planner, measuring risks and rewards in every action. The nights, though still cold, no longer carried the same terror. The Quonset blocked the wind, retained the heat from my small stove, and provided a sense of safety that I had never known. I learned to listen to the mountain differently. The soft crack of settling snow, the distant movement of wildlife, the subtle changes in temperature that predicted storms. I could anticipate danger in ways I never could in the city or classroom. This awareness became part of my survival, and with it came a growing sense of confidence. I was no longer helpless. I was capable. Food remained scarce, but I became skilled at maximizing what little I had. I learned to dry berries and herbs for storage, melt snow efficiently for water, and ration small portions without panic. Hunting small game and fishing from hidden streams taught patience, observation, and humility. Every meal I prepared was a victory, a tangible sign that I could sustain myself. The Quonset was more than metal and stone. It was the center of a fragile but thriving ecosystem that I controlled, and controlling it meant I could endure. The physical work was relentless, but it shaped more than my body. It shaped my mind, my perception of value, and my understanding of time. I no longer obsessed over grades, resumes, or what I had lost after college. Instead, I measured success in completed repairs, in warm nights, in food preserved, in snow melted, and firewood stacked. Each achievement was small yet cumulative. The Quonset became a mirror of my growth. As I strengthened the walls and sealed gaps, I strengthened my resolve and self-reliance. Loneliness remained a constant shadow, but it had shifted from despair to introspection. I began to converse with myself with purpose, narrating daily accomplishments and strategizing improvements. I created stories, imagined visitors, and occasionally spoke aloud to animals that passed by, squirrels, birds, and the occasional deer. I documented my thoughts in crude journals, writing on scraps of paper scavenged from abandoned cabins or dropped by hikers. These words became proof of existence, a tether to humanity, even as I remained physically isolated. As months passed, the Quonset transformed further. I dug a small trench around the base to redirect melting snow, reinforced weak corners with additional metal panels, and constructed storage compartments for supplies. Each modification increased efficiency, comfort, and longevity. I even began collecting moss and insulation materials to line the sleeping area, softening the cold bite of the metal floor. The Quonset had evolved from survival shelter to a livable, practical home. It had become a testament to perseverance, creativity, and the human instinct to endure. Winter returned, harsher than the previous one. Snowstorms battered the mountain with relentless force. Yet, unlike before, I faced them with preparation rather than fear. The Quonset shielded me, the stove kept me warm, and my accumulated experience allowed me to anticipate dangers. I reinforced the entrance with logs, monitored the snow load on the roof, and rationed supplies with foresight. The storm raged outside, but inside I felt a calm sense of achievement. I was alive, and I had built the means to stay that way. In solitude, I discovered unexpected aspects of myself. I learned to appreciate silence, to observe subtle changes in weather and animal behavior, and to trust my instincts. Fear and doubt still emerged, but they were tempered by experience and resilience. I realized that survival was not just a physical endeavor. It was an emotional and mental journey. Each day of hardship strengthened my capacity for endurance and deepened my understanding of my own limits, and how to push past them. By the time spring arrived again, I had transformed completely. The Quonset was no longer a temporary refuge but a permanent testament to adaptation and persistence. I had endured hunger, cold, fear, and isolation. I had built warmth, security, and routine. Most importantly, I had built confidence, patience, and belief in myself. I looked at the curved metal walls, the small stove, the sleeping nook, and the reinforced panels, and I realized that what I had created was more than shelter. It was life. I reflected on the journey, the loss after college, the nights of shivering under tarps, the struggle to survive each day. All of it had led to this moment. I understood that nothing, not even desperation, could stop someone determined to endure. The Quonset, abandoned and forgotten by others, had become a vessel of hope, a classroom, and a home. It had kept me alive physically and mentally, teaching lessons that no ordinary life could. Living there changed my perspective completely. I no longer feared solitude. I no longer measured my worth by social approval or material success. I had built something from nothing, and that act defined me more than any degree or job ever could. The mountain and the Quonset became inseparable from who I was. Together we had survived. Together we had grown. And I realized that sometimes, the very thing you create to endure, hardship becomes the instrument that teaches you how to truly live. Even now, looking back, I see that mountain not as a place of exile, but as a crucible. The Quonset, bent, weathered, and scarred, stands as a monument to resilience, a daily reminder that survival is not just about resisting the world, but about shaping it, however modestly, into something that supports life, hope, and renewal. That rusted metal against the mountain had kept me alive, but it also gave me the strength to imagine a future, to dream beyond mere survival, and to trust in my own ability to overcome whatever came next.